2:15 in the afternoon, the South China Sea. Commander Sarah Vance felt the subtle vibration of her F-35C Lightning II as it banked over the Paracel Islands. This was a standard freedom of navigation flight. It was not supposed to be a combat mission, but as she checked her tactical display, the digital world began to dissolve. The green icons representing her wingmen flickered. One by one, they turned a deep, predatory red. Viking 1 to Viking lead. A voice crackled over the secure net. My identification friend or foe system is showing a hardware fault. I am squawking hostile. Vance checked her own status. Her transponder was non-responsive. To every radar in the region, she was no longer a friendly American pilot. She was an unidentified intruder in a very crowded sky. The question was why it was happening to everyone at once. The air was thick with humidity below 10,000 feet. Below the canopy, the turquoise water looked peaceful. It was a lie. Somewhere to the north, Chinese radar operators were watching their screens turn red. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The room was a cavern of blue light and hushed, urgent voices. Technicians stared at their consoles in disbelief. The entire air wing had gone dark on their screens. 24 aircraft were now registered as hostiles on their own carrier's defense system. The tactical commander grabbed the radio. All Viking and Raven elements. This is Lincoln. Reset your transponders. Recycle your systems now. There was no response. The electronic handshake that kept the peace in the Pacific had been severed. 80 miles to the north, at Lingshui Air Base on Hainan Island, the alarms were already sounding. A young officer stared at a massive glass display. 24 American contacts had just changed their electronic signatures. They were no longer broadcasting the codes that identified them as international traffic. The officer spoke to his superior. They are masking. The Americans have gone to a combat profile. The base commander did not hesitate. Scramble the alert birds. Interceptor Group 7 is cleared for takeoff. Intercept and identify. Rules of engagement are active. 4 J-20 stealth fighters moved toward the runway. Their engines roared, sending shimmering heat waves across the concrete. The pilots did not know why the Americans had suddenly challenged them. They only knew that their sensors showed a massive strike package heading toward their sovereign waters. Back in the cockpit of her F-35, Sarah Vance watched her warning receiver. A high-energy pulse hit her sensors. It was a search radar from a Chinese Type 055 destroyer. It was looking for a target. Her wingman spoke again. Lead, I am being painted. The destroyer is locked on. Vance gripped the control stick. Hold your course. Do not arm your weapons. We are still in international airspace. If we turn on our fire control, they will think we are attacking. She knew the math. In less than 5 minutes, they would be within range of Chinese air-to-air missiles. Without their identification systems, there would be no way for the Chinese pilots to tell the difference between a technical glitch and an act of war. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:22 in the afternoon. Hainan Island. The underground command center at Lingshui was usually a place of quiet, professional routine. That changed in 3 seconds. Senior Colonel Zhang stood before the primary situational display. The blue icons representing the American carrier wing did not just fade. They turned into flashing red diamonds. In the cold logic of military data links, a red diamond is a threat. It is a target. Zhang spoke to his lead technician. Report. Is this a system error? The technician did not look up. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Negative, Colonel. The signals are clean. The Americans have manually disabled their identification friend or foe transponders. Every single one of them. They are now flying in a dark strike profile. Zhang felt a chill. This was not a single pilot making a mistake. This was a coordinated action by an entire air wing. To an observer, it looked like the opening move of a saturation attack. He picked up the secure line to the Southern Theater Command. This is Lingshui. We have 24 non-cooperative American targets at 30,000 feet. They are 60 miles from our territorial waters. requesting immediate intercept. The response was instantaneous. Authorized. Scramble Red Dragon flight. Rules of engagement are yellow. Do not fire unless fired upon, but do not let them cross the line. 2:24 in the afternoon. On the tarmac, two J-20 stealth fighters taxied rapidly toward the runway. These were the most advanced aircraft in the Chinese inventory. Their twin engines produced a low, guttural roar that shook the windows of the control tower. The lead pilot, Major Chen, checked his helmet-mounted display. Red Dragon 1 is rolling. Red Dragon 2 is on my wing. The interceptors lifted off into the humid afternoon air. They retracted their landing gear and banked hard to the south. Within minutes, they would be traveling at Mach 1.2. Their sensors were already searching the sky for the ghost wing. 2:26 in the afternoon. Over the open ocean, Commander Sarah Vance saw a new icon on her glass cockpit display. Two high-speed contacts were climbing fast from Hainan Island. They were not wandering. They were on an intercept vector. Vance spoke to her wingman. Viking 2, we have company. Two J-20s climbing from the mainland. They are coming in hot. Copy. Lead. My radar is picking up their search pulses. They are looking for us. Should we activate our combat radars? Vance hesitated. If she turned on her radar, the Chinese would see it as a hostile act. If she kept it off, she was flying blind against some of the best fighters in the world. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Negative. Viking 2. Keep our radars in standby. We are not the aggressors here. Let them see that we are not locking them up. But she knew the reality. To the Chinese pilots, her F-35 was already a target. The digital world had already decided they were enemies. The humans were just trying to keep up. The distance between the two groups was now less than 40 miles. At their combined speed, they would meet in less than 3 minutes. The air was perfectly clear, but the electronic fog was getting thicker. 2:27 in the afternoon. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln was a tomb of blue shadows and high-frequency hums. Captain Thomas Miller stood behind the main tactical console. Usually, the screen was a neat arrangement of blue icons representing his own aircraft. Now, it was a chaotic swarm of red diamonds. Every aircraft launched from his deck was now registered by the ship's own computer as a threat. The Combat Information Center, or the CIC, was designed to process thousands of data points a second. Right now, it was processing a lie. The tactical action officer turned to Miller. His face was pale in the glow of the monitors. Sir, the Aegis combat system is entering an automated defense state. It sees 24 high-speed hostiles closing on the carrier at Mach 0.9. It is requesting a fire solution. Miller gripped the edge of the console. Negative. Override the auto defense. Those are our people. I will not have this ship fire on its own pilots. Sir, if we override, we are vulnerable. The officer responded. We have two foreign jet fighter aircraft closing from the north. They are not ghosts, they are real. If they launch, the system needs to react instantly. We cannot tell the difference on the screen between a Viking F-35 and a Chinese interceptor. Miller looked at the screen. The red diamonds were intermingled now. The Chinese jets were merging with the American formation. On the digital display, it looked like a swirling dogfight was already happening. In reality, no one had fired a shot, but the computer did not know that. It only saw hostile signatures moving in aggressive patterns. 80 miles away, inside the lead J-20, Major Chen felt his heart hammering against his ribs. His cockpit was filled with the rhythmic chirping of his radar warning receiver. He was being scanned by the American carrier, Red Dragon 2. Chen spoke into his mask. The American carrier has us on its fire control radar. They are preparing to launch surface-to-air missiles. Copy, leader. His wingman replied. My systems are slave to yours. I have a lock on the nearest American contact. It is an F-35. Distance is 30 miles. Chen looked out his canopy. The sky was a brilliant, empty blue. He could not see the Americans yet, He only saw them as red symbols on his glass display. His training told him to fire before the enemy did. His logic told him that the Americans were acting strangely. Why were they not locking him back? Why were they just sitting there in the sky, squawking hostile codes but not maneuvering to attack? Hold your fire, Chen commanded. We do not initiate, we only respond. Back on the Lincoln, the tension reached a breaking point. A loud alarm began to pulse through the CIC. Captain, the weapons officer shouted. We have a new contact. Subsurface. A sonar ping just hit our hull. It is a loud, active search. Someone just turned a flashlight on in the basement. Miller felt the weight of the entire ocean on his shoulders. He had 24 pilots who appeared to be enemies. He had foreign fighters closing at supersonic speeds, and now a submarine had just revealed itself directly beneath his ship. Who is it? Miller asked. I cannot classify it, sir. The sonar tech replied, by the noise of our own engines. But they are close, inside 5,000 yards. The electronic world had failed them. Now, the physical world was closing in. 2:30 in the afternoon. The ocean was no longer a highway. It was a trap. 2:31 in the afternoon. Above the South China Sea, Commander Sarah Vance watched the two Chinese J-20 fighters split their formation. They were no longer just observing. They were maneuvering for an advantage. One climbed toward the sun, disappearing into the glare. The other dropped low, attempting to get beneath the radar floor of her wingman. The pilot of Viking 2 spoke over the internal circuit. Lead. The low contact is moving into my 6 o'clock. He is in a firing position. My systems are screaming. He has a solid infrared lock. Vance forced her voice to remain calm. Steady. 2. Do not break. If you pull a high G maneuver now, he will think you are clearing for a shot. We have to sit through this. It was a test of nerves that defied every instinct of a fighter pilot. They were flying at 400 knots, with a high-performance interceptor sitting on their tail, ready to launch a missile. The rules of engagement were clear but terrifying. They could not defend themselves until a weapon was actually in the air. 2:32 in the afternoon. Inside the lead J-20, Major Chen stared at his primary sensor display. The American F-35 was framed perfectly in his targeting reticle. His fire control computer was chirping a steady, high-pitched tone. It was a perfect solution. One press of a button on his control stick would release a PL-10 missile. Chen spoke to his wingman. Red Dragon 2. I have the lock. The target is not reacting. They are maintaining a steady course and altitude. It is a trap, his wingman responded. They are baiting us. Look at their electronic signatures. They are squawking a wartime code. They want us to fire first to justify a carrier strike. Chen hesitated. The data on his screen told him he was looking at an enemy in a combat stance, but his eyes told him something else. The Americans were flying as if they were on a parade route. Their weapons bays were closed. Their wings were level. It was a contradiction that the computer could not resolve. 2:33 in the afternoon. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, Captain Miller received a report from the communications center. The officer reported, Captain, we are attempting to hail the Chinese aircraft and the Lingshui base on the International Guard frequency. We are broadcasting our system failure in the clear, but there is a massive wall of white noise on all channels. Someone is jamming the emergency bands. Miller looked at the sonar display. The unknown contact below the ship was still rising. Is it the submarine? Are they the ones jamming us? Possible, sir, the sonar tech said. The contact is now at 300 feet. He is coming up right in the middle of our carrier strike group. He is 3,000 yards off our port beam. The situation was spiraling out of control. Miller had hostile-coded aircraft in the sky and a mystery contact surfacing in his wake. In the world of high-stakes naval strategy, there are no coincidences. He had to assume this was a coordinated ambush. Alert the escorts, Miller commanded. Tell the destroyers to train their guns on that contact. If it is a submarine, I want a visual identification the second it breaks the surface. 2:34 in the afternoon. The distance between the American, they were now in the visual arena. Vance looked out her canopy to the left. She saw the sleek, dark gray shape of a J-20 pulling alongside her. The Chinese pilot was so close she could see the numbers on his tail. He was banked slightly, showing her the missiles tucked under his wings. She keyed her radio, hoping the short-range signal would punch through the jamming. This is Viking lead to Chinese aircraft. We have a technical malfunction. We are not hostile. I repeat, we are not hostile. The Chinese pilot did not respond. He just sat there, a shadow in the sky, watching her through the glass. The air was heavy with the weight of weapons ready to fire. One finger twitch on either side would start a war. 2:35 in the afternoon, the South China Sea. The airspace was becoming a crowded arena of high-speed metal and lethal intent. More aircraft were entering the box every minute. On the American side, the USS Abraham Lincoln had launched its remaining alert fighters to provide a screen for the carrier. On the Chinese side, a second wave of interceptors had arrived from the mainland. 48 advanced military aircraft were now concentrated in a 50-mile radius. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer shouted over the noise of cooling fans and alerts. "Captain, we have 48 contacts on the main plot. Half are squawking hostile, half are unknown. The system is saturated. It cannot distinguish between our own dark wing and the Chinese second wave." Captain Miller stared at the screen. The red diamonds were everywhere. It looked like a swarm of angry bees. "Do not engage. I repeat, no one fires until they are fired upon. We are in a defensive posture only." 2:36 in the afternoon. The electronic environment was reaching a breaking point. Two American EA-18G Growlers, the specialized electronic warfare planes, were now in the air. Their mission was to protect the fleet from incoming missiles. They began to pump out high-energy noise to blind any potential targeting radars. The Growler pilot spoke to his electronic warfare officer. "Raven 1-1, commencing wideband jamming. We are cutting their data links." The sky became a wall of electronic snow. Radar screens on both sides flickered and died. The Chinese J-20 pilots suddenly lost their connection to their ground controllers at Lingshui. The American pilots lost their link to the Lincoln. Every pilot was now an island. They were flying at supersonic speeds, in a blind fog of their own making. This was the moment of maximum danger. In the absence of data, pilots rely on instinct. And instinct in a cockpit usually points toward the trigger. 2:37 in the afternoon. Major Chen felt the sweat stinging, his eyes inside his flight helmet. His digital display was a mess of jagged lines and false targets. The American jamming was powerful. It was designed to provoke a reaction. Chen spoke to his wingman. "Red Dragon 2, we have lost the link. Move to visual rules. Do not let the Americans push us back. Perform a head-on pass to show resolve." The two Chinese fighters banked hard. They turned their noses directly toward the American formation. This was a hot intercept. They were flying a collision course at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. Inside her F-35, Sarah Vance saw the J-20 turn toward her. It was no longer flying alongside. It was coming straight at her cockpit. "Viking 2. Brake right. Brake right," Vance commanded. "He is coming down the pipe." The American pilots pulled their sticks back. Their aircraft groaned under the stress of 6 G-forces. They spiraled away from the oncoming Chinese jets. It was a desperate maneuver to avoid a mid-air collision. The Chinese pilots did not follow. They flew through the gap and circled back. They were now positioned behind the Americans. Inside the Lincoln, the weapons officer screamed, "Captain, the Chinese have moved to offensive positions. On our entire air wing, they are in the 6 o'clock. We have lost the tactical advantage." Miller felt the air leave the room. Every one of his pilots was now at the mercy of a Chinese missile lock. And because of the IFF failure, his pilots could not tell who was who. The tension was no longer an abstract concept. It was a physical weight. Both sides had committed their forces. Both sides had their fingers on the launch buttons. The electronic warfare had stripped away the truth. All that remained was the hardware and the heat. The sky was screaming with the sound of engines and the silent roar of jamming. The world was seconds away from a massive air-to-air engagement. The morning was over. The crisis was at its peak. 2:38 in the afternoon. Inside the lead Chinese interceptor, Major Chen felt his jet shudder as the internal weapons bay doors cycled open. The drag altered the flight characteristics of the J-20 for a brief second. On his helmet-mounted display, the American F-35 was a solid red diamond. The tone in his ear was a single, unbroken scream. It was a high-probability kill solution. His fire control computer had calculated the intercept. He only needed to squeeze the trigger to send a PL-10 missile into the tail of the American jet. "Target is locked," Chen said into his mask. "Confirm authorization to engage." The response from his ground controller was a wall of screeching static. The electronic jamming from the American Growlers had finally severed the link. He was alone in the cockpit with a target in his sights and a weapon ready to fire. 2:38 and 15 seconds in the afternoon. Commander Sarah Vance watched her tactical screen fail. The radar warning receiver moved from a search pulse to a track-while scan and then to a solid, continuous lock. It was the sound every pilot feared. It meant a missile was seconds from being launched. Viking 2. "He has his doors open," Vance shouted. "He is looking for a shot. Prepare for defensive maneuvers. Preemptive flares on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." A massive cloud of burning magnesium bloomed behind the two American jets. To a radar, it looked like a cluster of false targets. To the Chinese pilots, the bright flash in the sky looked like the exhaust trail of a missile launch. 2:38 and 45 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Lincoln, the noise was deafening. Every console was flashing yellow and red. "Missile launch detected," the weapons officer screamed. "The interceptors are firing. We have inbound heat seekers." Captain Miller stood frozen for a fraction of a second. "Engage the phalanx systems. All ships. Defensive fire only. Do not launch a counter battery yet. I want a positive ID on that launch." "Sir, we have a torpedo launch," the sonar tech yelled. "The subsurface contact is active. One incoming, bearing 045. It is heading straight for the Higgins." The destroyer USS Higgins was less than 2,000 yards from the carrier. Its crew had seconds to react to a weapon they could not see. 2:39 in the afternoon. The world was falling apart. In the air, the Chinese wingman saw the flares from the American F-35 and interpreted them as an attack. He pulled his control stick and banked hard toward the American wingman. His nose was pointed. His finger was on the trigger. He was going to fire a medium-range missile to protect his leader. On the surface, the mystery submarine was now fully on the surface of the water. It was a massive, windowless hull made of a black composite material that seemed to swallow the sunlight. It was not broadcasting a signal. It was not flying a flag. It was moving at 40 knots, cutting a white wake through the turquoise water directly toward the carrier. 2:39 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. Every sensor on the Lincoln reached maximum capacity. The Aegis combat system began the final countdown for an automated response. In 10 seconds, the ship would launch a wall of surface-to-air missiles at every red diamond in the sky. It would be a slaughter. In the air, Major Chen tightened his grip on the control stick. The American pilot was framed in his targeting reticle. He took a short, sharp breath. He began to squeeze the trigger. 2:40 in the afternoon. The South China Sea. Major Chen's finger was a fraction of a millimeter from the trigger. The tone in his ears was a solid, piercing scream. He was ready to kill. Then, the sound stopped. It did not fade. It vanished. His entire glass cockpit display went dark for one heartbeat. When it flickered back to life, the red diamond over the American F-35 was gone. In its place was a bright, steady blue icon. Chen blinked. He checked his backup sensors. The American was no longer a target. The digital logic of his aircraft had just declared the enemy a friend. 2:40 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the red diamonds on the master plot vanished in a single wave. It looked like a curtain being pulled back. 24 American aircraft and 24 Chinese aircraft were suddenly all the same color, blue. Captain Miller stared at the screen. Report. What just happened? The tactical action officer was stunned. Sir, the identification friend or foe handshake just re-established. But it is not just our codes. We are receiving a universal identification signal. The Chinese jets are broadcasting a civilian emergency transponder code. We are seeing them as non-combatant traffic. And the torpedo? Miller asked. It was not a torpedo, sir, the sonar tech said, his voice shaking. It was an acoustic burst, a data packet. The mystery contact on the surface just sent a massive burst of information through the water and the air simultaneously. 2:41 in the afternoon. Commander Sarah Vance saw the change on her own display. The J-20 that had been on her wing was no longer a threat. Her system had classified it as a search and rescue asset. She looked out the canopy. The Chinese pilot, Major Chen, was no longer in a fighting bank. He had leveled his wings. He was looking directly at her. He raised a gloved hand and pointed down toward the ocean. Vance looked down. The black vessel was sitting motionless between the two fleets. It was not a submarine. It was an unmanned surface drone, nearly 300 feet long. It was covered in a forest of antennas and satellite dishes. The jamming that had choked the air for the last 20 minutes suddenly cleared. The radio hummed with 1,000 voices. All stations, this is Global Satellite Control. A calm, automated voice spoke on the International Guard frequency. We have regained control of the Pacific Relay Network. A software collision between the civilian satellite network and military frequencies has been resolved. All emergency transponders have been reset to default. 2:42 in the afternoon. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It was a technical glitch. A billion-dollar error in a civilian satellite patch had nearly triggered a world war. The black vessel was a mobile repair hub that had been deployed to fix the signal. It had arrived just in time to tell the machines to stop lying to the humans. Vance felt the cold sweat on her neck. Viking. Lead to all units. Disengage. I repeat, disengage. We are going home. Across the sky, the 48 aircraft began to bank away from each other. There was no more fire control, no more locks. The machines were satisfied. The humans were exhausted. 2:43 in the afternoon. The South China Sea. Commander Sarah Vance stared at her glass cockpit display. The red icons had vanished. The blue icons were back, but the adrenaline in her system did not disappear with the change in color. Her heart was still racing at 100 beats per minute. Her hands were still tight on the controls. The digital world had suddenly decided everything was fine. The physical world was still vibrating with the heat of 48 jet engines. Viking lead to Viking 2, Vance said. Her voice was raspy. Confirm your display status. Do you see what I see? Lead. I have a blue sky, her wingman replied. The J-20 on my tail is now showing as a friendly search and rescue asset. My systems are telling me he is an ally, but my eyes are telling me he is still carrying 4 missiles. Vance looked to her left. The Chinese pilot, Major Chen, was still flying level with her. He was no longer maneuvering for a kill. He was just watching. The silence on the radio was absolute until a new signal broke through the static. 2:44 in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the massive display was a sea of steady blue light. Captain Miller stood at the center of the room. The transition had been so fast, it felt like a dream, but the tactical reality remained. Get me an assessment, Miller commanded. Is this a spoof? Is the enemy hacking our identification systems? The tactical action officer spoke quickly. Negative, sir. We are receiving a verified decryption key from the global satellite network. It is an emergency reset protocol. The civilian satellite uplink that handles the regional transponder relay had a massive software collision. It was a corrupted patch. It forced every aircraft and ship in the sector into a non-cooperative state. The system defaulted to hostile. Miller looked at the sonar tech. And the mystery contact? Identified, sir, the tech replied. It is the G-S-N Neptune. It is an unmanned repair and relay ship. It was sent to this sector to fix the satellite dead zone. It arrived 10 minutes ago. It just broadcast a wide area signal that overrode the corrupted data. It basically rebooted the sky. Miller felt a wave of nausea. A billion-dollar software error had nearly started a war between two nuclear powers. The machines had seen a ghost, and the humans had almost followed them into the dark. 2:45 in the afternoon. Inside the lead foreign jet, Major Chen watched the American F-35. He knew how close he had come to pulling the trigger. He could still feel the weight of the control stick. His ground controller was back on the radio. The connection was clear now. Red Dragon 1. This is the command facility. We have confirmed a massive technical failure in the transponder network. The Americans are not attacking. They are experiencing the same error. Break off your intercept. Maintain a distance of 5 miles and wait for further instructions. Chen took a deep breath. Copy. Facility. Breaking left. Red Dragon. 2. Follow me. The two foreign fighters banked away. They did not dive or climb. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace that signaled their intent. It was a professional courtesy. They were giving the Americans space. They were telling them the fight was over. Sarah Vance watched them go. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to give way to a heavy, crushing exhaustion. She checked her fuel gauges. She had enough to get back to the carrier. But her mind was already moving toward the debrief. She keyed her radio to the open guard channel. Viking lead to Red Dragon. I see you turning. Safe flight home. There was a long pause. Then, a voice spoke in accented but clear English. Red Dragon to Viking lead. Safe flight to your ship. Today was a very long day. The sky was once again a place of physics rather than politics. The 48 aircraft began to separate into their respective groups. The air was clear. The ocean was quiet. But the question remained. If the machines could lie once, they could lie again. 2:46 in the afternoon. The South China Sea. Commander Sarah Vance stared at her glass cockpit display. The red icons had vanished. The blue icons were back, but the phantom image of that J-20 turning toward her remained burned into her retina. She adjusted her oxygen mask. Her breathing was heavy and ragged. Viking, lead to Lincoln, Vance said. Her voice was steady now. The air is clear. We are separating from the Red Dragon flight. All Viking elements are reporting green systems. We are ready to come home. The response from the carrier was immediate. Viking led, Lincoln. We copy. Vector is 210. Come on home, Sarah. We have the deck ready for you. Vance banked her F-35C into a gentle turn. She looked over her shoulder one last time. The two Chinese fighters were small, gray specks. Against the towering white clouds of the horizon, they were heading north. They were going home too. 2:48 in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, Captain Miller finally sat down in his command chair. He felt like he had aged a decade in 20 minutes. The blue glow of the room felt cold now. The tactical action officer was hunched over the master logs. Sir, the Neptune drone is maintaining its position, the officer reported. It is broadcasting a wide area maintenance code to keep satellite relay in a bypass mode. It is essentially acting as a temporary cell tower for the entire fleet. Our identification friend, or foe systems, are slave to its signal now. Miller rubbed his eyes. And the Chinese? Are they still on the network? Yes, sir. They are using the same relay. For the moment, we are both seeing the same truth. The software collision has been isolated to a specific frequency range used by the civilian satellite uplink. When our planes entered that zone, the data packets were corrupted. The computers saw the corruption as a deliberate spoofing attempt and defaulted to a hostile classification. Miller looked at the screen. A default to war. We built a system that assumes the worst when it stops understanding the world. 2:50 in the afternoon. Ling Shui Air Base. Senior Colonel Zhang stood in the center of the command floor. The room was silent. Every technician was staring at the telemetry data from Major Chen's J-20. The moment the weapon was authorized, the line stopped just short of the launch command. 2 seconds, Zhang whispered to himself. His lead technician turned around. Colonel, the Americans are broadcasting an open-channel apology on the military hotline. They are identifying the technical cause as a civilian infrastructure failure. They are requesting a formal de-escalation meeting at the diplomatic level. Zhang nodded slowly. Accept the transmission. Tell the Red Dragon flight to land and remain in their cockpits for the initial debrief. I want every bit of sensor data from their helmets. I want to know exactly what they saw before the machines changed their minds. The crisis was no longer in the air. It had moved into the wires and the servers. The immediate threat of fire had been replaced by a deep, quiet dread. Both nations had realized that their most advanced weapons were vulnerable to a mistake made by a civilian programmer thousands of miles away. The afternoon sun was beginning to drop toward the horizon. The water below was a deep, dark blue. The 48 aircraft that had almost destroyed each other were now landing on their respective runways and decks. The immediate danger was over, but the silence in the sky felt different now. It felt fragile. 2:51 in the afternoon. The South China Sea. Commander Sarah Vance adjusted her glide slope as the massive silhouette of the USS Abraham Lincoln grew in her canopy. The carrier was steaming into the wind, creating a steady deck for recovery. There were no cheers over the radio. There was only the rhythmic, professional cadence of the landing signal officer. Viking led. You are on center line. Power, power, relax. Vance felt the heavy thud as her landing gear struck the steel deck. The tailhook caught the third wire with a violent jerk that threw her forward against her harness. The engine roared as she went to full military power for a split second. A standard safety measure, in case the wire snapped. It held. She pulled the throttle back to idle. The world stopped moving. She sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands still trembling slightly. Outside, the flight deck crews in their colorful jerseys moved with practiced efficiency. They were already chaining her aircraft down. They did not know how close they had come to a burial at sea. 2:54 in the afternoon. Lingshui Air Base. Major Chen flared his J-20 over the runway. The heavy fighter touched down smoothly, its twin parachutes deploying from the tail to slow the supersonic airframe. He taxied toward a hardened hangar where a team of technicians was already waiting. They were not carrying fuel hoses. They were carrying data readers. Chen shut down his engines. The high-pitched whine of the turbines faded into a heavy silence. He pushed back his canopy and felt the humid tropical air hit his face. It felt real. The digital nightmare of the last 40 minutes felt like a fever dream. His wingman climbed down from the ladder of the adjacent jet. They looked at each other across the concrete. No words were exchanged. No salutes were given. They both knew that they were alive because of a few seconds of human hesitation. 2:58 in the afternoon. The G-S-N Neptune sat alone on the surface of the water, 10 miles from the American carrier group. Its antennas were still tracking the invisible satellites miles above. It was a silent sentry, maintaining the bridge between two worlds. Because of its presence, the radar screens in the region remained stable. The blue icons stayed blue. The piece was being held together by a single stream of binary code. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Lincoln, Captain Miller watched the final aircraft of the wing being lowered onto the hangar deck. The status board was finally clear. All birds are home, the tactical action officer announced. Miller nodded. Set condition. 3 across the strike group. Keep the Aegis system in manual override until we get a direct order from 7th Fleet. I want a full diagnostic on every transponder in the wing. If one of them so much as blinks, I want to know. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was high and bright. The South China Sea looked like a sheet of blue glass. From the height of a satellite, the two fleets looked like toy ships in a vast, empty bathtub. There were no visible scars from the encounter, no smoke, no wreckage. But the data logs told a different story. For 4 minutes, the world had been viewed through a distorted lens. The machines had seen a war. The humans had seen a mistake. The crisis was resolved, but the professional mask was starting to slip. In the quiet of the ready rooms and the hangars, the men and women who had held the triggers were beginning to realize just how much they had trusted the ghosts in their machines. The sky was empty. The ocean was still. The tactical phase was over. 6:30 in the evening. The Pentagon and the Great Hall of the People. The sun had long since set over the South China Sea, but in the command centers of Washington and Beijing, the lights were burning at maximum intensity. The tactical emergency had ended, but the strategic post-mortem was just beginning. Digital forensics teams from both nations were already deep inside the data logs of the global satellite network. What they found was not a deliberate act of sabotage or a clever cyber attack. It was something far more mundane and, in many ways, far more terrifying. A civilian contractor for a major telecommunications firm had pushed a routine software update to the regional satellite cluster 4 hours before the incident. The update was designed to optimize bandwidth for 5G maritime commerce. However, a single line of code in the packet switching protocol conflicted with the encrypted handshake used by military identification friend or foe systems. When the American air wing transitioned into the coverage zone of that specific satellite, the two signals collided. The resulting data corruption stripped away the friendly identifiers and replaced them with a default non-cooperative flag. The machines did exactly what they were programmed to do. In the absence of a friend signal, they assumed a foe. 7:15 in the evening. Inside a windowless room at the Office of Naval Intelligence, analysts watched the synchronized playback of the incident. On one screen, they saw the cockpit footage from Commander Sarah Vance. On the other, they saw the radar telemetry from Major Chen's J-20. The two videos were perfectly aligned. They saw the exact moment the Chinese pilot's weapons bay doors cycled open. They saw the American flares bloom in the dark sky. "Look at the timestamp," a senior analyst said, pointing to the screen. From the moment the IFF failed to the moment the first missile was authorized was exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds. We were 2 seconds away from a kinetic exchange involving 48 aircraft. If either pilot had been less experienced, we would be in a general war right now. 8 o'clock in the evening. The diplomatic hotline between the two capitals was active for the first time in 6 months. The conversation was not one of threats or posturing. It was a cold, professional exchange of technical data. Both sides realized that their automated defense systems had almost bypassed human command. The Ghostwing incident had revealed a critical vulnerability in the architecture of modern warfare. The more complex the systems became, the more fragile the peace was. In his office at Lingshui, Senior Colonel Zhang read the preliminary report from Major Chen. The pilot had described the moment of hesitation, the visual contradiction that stopped his finger on the trigger. Zhang circled one sentence in red ink. "The machine told me to kill, but my eyes told me to wait." Zhang leaned back in his chair. He knew that in the next generation of fighters, the windows would be smaller and the sensors would be more powerful. The human in the loop was being pushed further and further to the edge of the decision-making process. Today, the humans had won, but the software was already being rewritten. The tactical aftermath was clear. The hardware worked perfectly. The software failed spectacularly, and for 4 minutes, the fate of the Pacific had rested on the steady hands of two pilots who refused to believe what their screens were telling them. The evening was quiet. The investigation would take months, but the lesson was already learned by those who had been there. The machines are only as wise as the people who build them, and sometimes they are not wise at all. 1 week later, the Pentagon and the Ministry of National Defense, the South China Sea, returned to its natural state of contested beauty. The Whitecaps broke against the Scarborough Shoal. The civilian cargo ships resumed their slow, heavy transit between the ports of Asia and the West. To the casual observer, the crisis of the 14 had never happened. But inside the secure briefing rooms of the world's major powers, the atmosphere was forever changed. The final report was titled The Ghost Wing Incident. It was a document classified at the highest levels of secrecy. It did not focus on the bravery of the pilots or the skill of the carrier crew. It focused on the numbers. One civilian software patch, 3 minutes and 42 seconds of total electronic darkness, 2 seconds of human hesitation. The strategic assessment was clear. Modern warfare had reached a point where the speed of the machines had outpaced the speed of the diplomats. The automated systems were designed to react in milliseconds to a perceived threat, but the humans required minutes to verify the truth. In that gap between machine logic and human judgment, the world had almost caught fire. In a quiet office at the Naval War College, a strategic analyst stared at the data. He noted that the IFF system was supposed to be the ultimate safeguard. It was the digital handshake that prevented accidents. But when that handshake failed, the system did not ask questions. It did not seek context. It simply categorized the unknown as the enemy. The analyst wrote a single final thought in the summary. We have built a world where our safety depends on the perfection of millions of lines of code. But code is written by humans, and humans make mistakes. If we remove the pilot from the cockpit, we remove the only thing capable of seeing a mistake and choosing not to fire. 900 miles to the south, Commander Sarah Vance stood on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier was heading toward a port visit in Singapore. She looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the water in a thin, shimmering line. She thought about the foreign military pilot. She wondered if he was standing on a pier on a coastal island, looking at the same horizon. They were two people who had never met. They spoke different languages and served different flags. But for one terrifying afternoon, they had shared a secret truth. They were the only ones who knew how close the world had come to the edge. They were the ones who had looked into the eyes of the machine and said no. The G-S-N Neptune drone was still out there. It was now a permanent fixture in the sector, serving as a redundant relay to ensure the software collision never happened again. Its lights flickered in the dark, a tiny mechanical star in the vastness of the ocean. It was a solution to a problem, but it was also a reminder of the fragility of the piece. Strategic stability was no longer just about the number of missiles or the size of a carrier. It was about the integrity of a data stream. It was about the trust between a human and a screen. The morning was still. The Pacific was quiet. But the silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like a pause. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. On a humid Tuesday in the South China Sea, the world learned that lesson. The question for the next generation was whether they would still have the choice. The machines are ready, the software is waiting, and the human in the loop is the only thing left standing in the way of the ghosts.